theology in the way that we determine what is historically valid and what isn't. So you use the example of Alexander the Great. The reason why we know that Alexander the Great actually did exist is because there's tons of corroborating evidence. There are many people who wrote many things, who recorded all of his activities and his military conquests and things about his life, and all of that is missing from the gospel accounts.
Well, the
gospel accounts are the only existing documents. There's nothing else. If
actually, that's incorrect.
Let's take a story from the Gospels where he goes into the temple at Jerusalem during Passover and causes a riot. Okay? If this really happened, then not only could assume that the Romans would have documented that because it would have been huge. That occurrence
well, that's subjective, but go ahead.
Would have been massively disruptive. During that weekend in Jerusalem, somebody would have written something about it, a noted historian. It would have been documented by the Romans. There would be other things other than these 4 unsourced, anonymous documents.
Well, let me offer you something here. Flavius Josephus, who died around 101, mentions John the Baptist, Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 5, Paragraph 2.
Okay, he mentions Jesus. John the Baptist. Okay, great.
Okay, well, let me finish. He mentions Jesus, Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 3. I understand about the debate on the issues there. James, the brother of Jesus, is mentioned in Book 20, Chapter 19. Ananias, the high priest, is mentioned. Also, Tacitus, who died in 117 A.D., born in 55 A.D., Roman historian, mentions Christus, who is Jesus, in the book The Annals. Thallus, right around A.D. 52, mentions the eclipse of the sun. Pliny the Younger mentions Christ. He was the governor of Bithynia in Asia Minor. The Talmud talks about Yeshua being hanged. Lucian, circa 120 to after 180 range, mentions Jesus. There are other
okay,
things.
but you can go down your whole long list of contested passages.
Well, there you go. Evidence contested.
If you want to. But the fact is, let's assume that not all of those passages are contested. Let's assume even that some of them are contemporaneous, which they aren't, okay?
Wait a minute, Tacitus was around with the Ten Apostles.
Didn't do the things that the gospel accounts ascribe to him, because none of that other stuff is mentioned. Do you really think that a person who went into the temple at Jerusalem on Passover weekend and caused a riot would get a 1-sentence little blurb in Josephus?
Do you think that he was a Roman historian? Do you think... Two things to think about. Do you think that the Romans are going to be concerned about it? No. They don't care.
Oh, no, because the Romans weren't in power in Jerusalem at that time, and there wasn't a huge war that erupted right after that resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. They wouldn't have been concerned with that at all.
Yeah, it happened before, and they weren't concerned until later when it began in 69 A.D.
Yeah, they happened before, but Josephus was writing after that, so they would obviously have recorded the events that led up to such a cataclysmic thing.
Who said?
As, the Roman wars.
No, you're just making assumptions and inserting it into those criteria that are necessary. And all you're doing is offering me subjectivity. That's all you're doing. See, the gospel accounts are written.
You can claim that if you want to. But
I certainly can.
That would be like saying that this massive, earth-shattering event occurred.
Of what? Which one?
And nobody talked about it.
Which one?
We can't assume that they would have talked about something like that. So 100 years from now, maybe nobody will talk about 9/11 ever happening.
Which event?
Why would you want to assume that they would record this event?
Which event?
It wasn't gigantic, what would be today, headline breaking news on every major news network. Why assume that they would do that?
Which event are you talking about?
I'm speaking specifically, in reference to the Gospels of the
Give me an example.
Temple Passover incident, which is the example that I've been using.
So you would want the Jews...
There's no reason to assume that they would have recorded something like that.
So you would want the Jews to...
Meanwhile, the Romans kept, meticulous records of just about everything that went on. But why would they be concerned with that?
Well, first of all, the Romans weren't concerned about what happened so much over in that area. This is why they sent rulers over there and said, you take care of it. Second, do you think the Jews are going to want to record this thing about Jesus necessarily in every event, which would add validity to him? See, all you're doing is offering me subjective things, which really can't be verified and tested.
Okay, well, let's take that argument right there. You're saying, why would the Jews record this? It would add validity to the story. And one of the criteria, like in the example of like Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, is that he was recorded, like there's enemy attestation to their existence, and that is an important part of history. The Jews obviously not accepting this Jesus character as being the Messiah that they've been waiting for 6,000 years before that is pretty good evidence that the guy was just made up.
So, in other words, you're offering me subjectivity and with no scientific evidence or reasons to invalidate the truth of the Gospels. It's just that you just don't think it would make sense. You're not offering anything logical.
It's up to you to prove that they are valid. It's not up to me to prove that they aren't.
What would be criteria to prove that they're valid?
Well, all of the criteria we've just mentioned.
Well, with
corroborating evidence, external corroborating, contemporaneous evidence.
I've given you contemporaneous stuff.
The fact that the gospel accounts are true.
I've given you contemporary.
You gave me the gospel.
No, I gave you. Well, first of all, I gave you Tacitus.
You gave me a big long list of contested passages.
I gave you. I gave you several references, and we have the contemporary gospels, but you reject them. You just reject them.
I reject them because they're rejected by modern history in general. It's not my decision.
Oh, modern history? Wait, what does modern history in general mean?
What exactly is true and what isn't. It's because they don't add up. Because the testimonium is debated because it's known to be at least partially spurious.
Okay. So you're not offering me anything of any substance for why the Gospels are not true.
It's not my job to prove that they're not true. It's your job to prove that they are true.
I can't prove anything to you because your criteria don't allow proof to occur in this realm.
Well, no.
We would have to discuss.
And all of your proof doesn't meet actual historical criteria. That's why.
Yes, it does.
It's not contemporaneous.
It's not
sourced. It's not referenced. So the problem doesn't lie with my interpretation of it. The problem lies with the fact that the evidence just doesn't exist, and so, throughout history, Christians have had to just make things up, which is exactly what they did then, and is exactly what you're doing now. So I don't really see how I'm being subjective and you're not.
Do you have any proof that they just made things up? That's what you said. Now, you just said, it's up to the one who makes a claim to prove it, so can you prove that they just made stuff up, that they were basically liars?
We can prove that throughout history, human beings have made tons of things up.
Okay, so that's true. It's proof that they did.
Different documents,
guilt by association,
earlier manuscripts or pieces of manuscripts that show certain passages weren't there. We know about scribal interpolation. We know all about Eusebius and how much he loved to change things around, and he was in charge of the library for Constantine. We know all of these things, so yeah.
You have no proof. You have no proof. You said proof. You want evidence. You want facts. You require...
I want you to prove to me that it's true. I don't even know how we ended up talking about the history of Jesus anyway. But, it's fine. I'll talk about it.
Can I please...
It's not my job to disprove you. It's your job to prove your case.
Well, I'll tell you what. Two things. One, I'd like to finish my sentences. That'd be nice. Two, you haven't demonstrated why atheism is true. Because that's the claim we talked about. You're a strong atheist or an agnostic atheist. You say there is no evidence. Well, you can't say there is no evidence logically. You're not being logical there.
Okay, well then tell me what your evidence is.
No, you tell me why you're an atheist. I gave you...
Atheism is the default position.
How do you know that?
How do I know that? Because until somebody is taught God belief...
How do you know that?
You don't just naturally have it.
How do you know that?
You don't just have people just all of a sudden, from infancy, from birth, believing in this supernatural being with all of the lovely attributes that he possesses.
How do you know that?
People are taught that.
How do you know?